Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let us begin our discussion by first looking at the articles we are going to discuss today. I have chosen 9 important articles from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. We have 3 important articles for a detailed discussion, including a very important topic on India's position over the Israel-Palestine conflict. We're also going to talk about the recent earthquake in Nepal and the vulnerability of the Himalayan region for devastating earthquakes. And we also have an important topic from Indian economy. So following this, we will take up 6 smaller articles that are more relevant for the prelims examination. So let's carry out a detailed analysis of all these articles, and we'll ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So if you guys are liking the initiative, do support us by pressing the like button, share these videos with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also do subscribe to the Telegram channel as well, because we'll have a quiz after the session ends on these articles. The link for the Telegram channel is provided in the description box below. So with this, let's begin with the first article for today from page number 12. This article is examining India's position at the United Nations over the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's a very detailed article, and I feel it's a very important topic for international relations. There is a very good possibility of UPSC asking a question where you're asked to analyze India's nuanced, complex position on the Israel-Palestine issue. Now, this topic is in news because just last week, on the 26th of October, a resolution was brought up at the UN General Assembly which called for an immediate end to the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. As you all know, on the 7th of October, Hamas, which is a terrorist outfit operating in the Gaza Strip, carried out a brutal terror attack against Israel. In this terror attack, more than 1,400 Israelis were killed, following which Israel has declared war against Hamas and has unleashed complete bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Israel has even launched a ground invasion, causing a major humanitarian disaster in Gaza, because Gaza is home to around 2.4 million people, and many of these innocent Palestinians have been trapped in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. So this humanitarian tragedy pushed many countries around the world to push for a resolution at the UN General Assembly calling for an immediate, durable and sustained humanitarian truce with regard to the ongoing hostilities between Israel and Hamas. Essentially, the resolution was pushing for a ceasefire, for an immediate end to the military operations between Israel and Hamas. In this resolution, India has taken up a very different and a very unique position. This resolution, which was pushed by Jordan, it was initiated by Jordan, the neighbor of Israel. This resolution was supported by an overwhelming majority of the UN member states. Out of the 193 member countries, 120 countries supported the resolution, calling for an end for the war and putting pressure on Israel to ensure that human rights are protected. Because Israel has been accused of using disproportionate force, and in the name of targeting Hamas, it has been blatantly targeting civilians as well, resulting in this humanitarian tragedy. Hence, the global countries, they came together, almost 120 countries supported the resolution to bring pressure on Israel to end the hostilities immediately. Just around 14 countries voted against it, primarily the allies of Israel, particularly the Western countries, led by US and few European countries. They voted against this resolution, which was critical of Israel and its military actions. Now, India was one amongst the 45 countries which abstained from the vote. India neither voted for the resolution nor against the resolution, but we abstained from voting on this resolution. Now, please understand, at the United Nations or any global platform, even abstaining from a vote in itself is a decision. It's a policy decision. Just like you vote for a resolution or against it, abstaining from voting is also a decision. It's not It's not a case of indecisiveness. This in itself is a decision that indicates the policy approach of a country. So India's abstention on this resolution has come in for a lot of debate. Opposition parties in India have criticized the government for moving away from India's established position on the Israel-Palestine question. So within India, there has been a lot of domestic criticism against the government, where allegations have come up that India has broken from the past precedent and India has shifted its policy towards Israel and Palestine. However, the Indian government has defended the policy. The Indian government has said this is a continuation of the nuanced, complex policy that we have maintained over the Israel-Palestine question. Israel, on the other hand, rejected this resolution altogether, as it primarily targeted Israel and put pressure on Israel to end the war against Hamas. It rejected the resolution, but however, it welcomed the support from India. But Israel did say it would have welcomed India to vote against the resolution and stand with Israel completely. But however, it did express its gratitude towards India for abstaining from the vote, at least by taking the middle ground. Now, it's in this context that we should examine India's position. Opposition parties are criticizing the government, saying the government has broken from the established position. The government has defended the position it has taken, saying it's just a continuation of what we have been doing in the past as well. Right? But there are other countries which have taken different sides, and even they are critical of India's approach. So it becomes very important to understand what has been India's position on the complex question of the Israel-Palestine conflict. So let's look at this historically. There's a very big history behind it, right? It's not a very simple position that India has taken. It's a very complex and a principled position that India has consistently taken over this issue. Now, if you go back to 1948, when the UN had proposed the two-state solution, when UN had proposed the partition of the region to create a Jewish state called Israel and a Palestinian state for the Palestinian Arabs, this was essentially a communal partition, a partition on religious lines. So ideologically, India could not support such a communal partition. India itself had suffered the horrors of a communal partition, which resulted in the creation of Pakistan and brutal communal riots involving different communities between India and Pakistan. Plus, India saw the creation of Israel as a colonial imperialist policy of committing more blunders in the name of correcting historical mistakes. India saw that UK, with the support of US and Western countries, they were committing even more mistakes by backing the creation of Israel. So India aligned with all the former colonies, all the powers in Africa, Asia, and in Latin America, which were against colonialism, imperialism, and took a principled approach on the issue. So India took an ideological stand and a principled approach. Initially, we opposed the creation of Israel itself. We were against the two-state plan because this would provide for a communal division, a communal partition of the region. But eventually, India came around to accept the solution. Because as violence increased between the Jews and the Palestinian Arabs, and as Israel unilaterally declared independence in 1948, eventually Israel became a reality. It became a sovereign country. But when Israel broke the international law, when it went against the UN plan, India did not recognize Israel initially. In 1948, when Israel had unilaterally declared independence, India did not recognize the creation of Israel. This was again a principled approach. But after the first war, where the Arab countries went to war against Israel to liberate Palestine, and after Israel won this conflict, right, Israel firmly established itself as a sovereign country with global recognition, with many countries giving recognition to Israel. So eventually, India also recognized Israel in 1950. We even came around to accept the two-state solution as the only viable solution to end the humanitarian crisis in the region and to ensure that the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Arabs both have their rights. India decided to back the two-state solution, which is the only viable solution for Israelis to have their own country, for the Palestinians to have their own country. Since then, we have maintained a firm commitment to the two-state solution. From late 1940s, almost 1950 onwards, India has been firmly committed to the two-state solution, and even now, India backs the creation of two states. Recently as well, after the terror attack by Hamas, Prime Minister Modi and India's Foreign Ministry issued a statement. We criticized the terror attack. We supported Israel's right to defend itself against terrorism. At the same time, India also issued a statement supporting the two-state solution, supporting Palestinian rights, and calling upon Israel to use minimal force, proportionate force, to ensure human rights are not violated. So this shows the consistent position that we have taken on this complex issue. Of course, there have been some changes over a period of time, but by and large, India's position has been very nuanced. It's very well thought out by keeping in mind India's national interests at that point in time. See, from 1950s to 1991, the world was a very different world, right? The world was divided by the Cold War divide, and India had some very tough choices to make. India had a lot of dependency on the Arab countries as far as energy supplies were concerned. Plus, in the Arab nations, there was a very strong Indian community, an Indian diaspora, which we were concerned about. So India was always worried that there would be external pressure on India if we sided with Israel or even set up ties with Israel. India always had a fear, a genuine concern, that Arab countries could punish India. They could leverage our oil dependency, the presence of a large Indian community. They could leverage this to punish India, and as a result, India decided not to establish ties with Israel. Even though we recognized the country in 1950, we did not set up official ties with Israel until 1991-1992. Is that clear? This was mainly driven by the external conditions. In a divided world, right, where Arab countries were firmly backing the Palestinian cause, any opening of India-Israel relations would have been opposed by the Arab countries, and they could have leveraged our dependency, maybe cut off oil supplies to India, right, threatened the well-being of the Indian community. So driven by these obligations, India was forced to not set up ties with Israel until 1991, until the end of the Cold War. So it was a more realistic approach that India was taking, keeping in mind our national interests. In geopolitics, at a certain point, your ideological commitment takes a back seat. You have to get more pragmatic and realistic to look after your own self-interests. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how every country functions. Every country looks after its own national interests in their foreign policy. So India became very realistic. While we continued the principled support for Palestine, we continued the support for two-state solution. Parallelly, we decided not to set up official ties with Israel in order to not antagonize the Arab countries. So as a result, India would criticize Israel repeatedly whenever there was disproportionate use of force by Israel. Israel has a history of doing it. In 1950s, 1960s, even in 1970s. Israel has repeatedly used disproportionate force against Palestinians, resulting in large-scale humanitarian crisis situations. And every time, India has consistently voted against Israel at the UN, criticizing the use of disproportionate force. In fact, we even became the first non-Arab state to recognize the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people in 1988. We gave recognition to Palestine and the PLO as the legitimate authority, as the political representative of the Palestinians, and we consistently voted against Israel at the UN until late 1980s. But however, by 1968, India and Israel had established a covert relationship. Since we both had similar security challenges and concerns regarding terrorism and Pakistan's nuclear weapons program, India and Israel had come together secretly, forming a secret relationship. Then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had ordered India's RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, which is India's foreign intelligence agency, to cultivate a secret partnership with Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad. So very close security relations had already developed from 1960s onwards. However, officially we didn't have any ties with Israel. This remained a secret partnership where we would share intelligence, collaborate in intelligence operations, and this even elevated to strategic defense relations, including supply of weapons and military technology. So as our ties with Israel kept on improving, India's position also has found a better balance over the decades. You can see that in India's stand that has been taken on various issues over the last 3 decades. After 1991, the Cold War came to an end, Soviet Union had disintegrated. We headed towards a unipolar world and India got more flexibility in international geopolitics to take a much better balanced position on this issue. Because see, from 1970s itself, within the Arab world, a divide had come up. A divide between the Sunni powers and the Shia powers over support to the Palestinian cause. The Shia countries led by Iran, right? Iran became a conservative Shiite regime in 1979 following the Iranian Revolution. So Iran, along with Syria, Lebanon and others, they continued their support for Palestinian groups, including Palestinian terror organizations. As part of the support given to the liberation movement, countries like Iran, Shia powers like Iran, Syria and others would continue backing Palestinian terror groups, and they would even wish death to Israel. Israel and Iran would become hostile countries to each other, whereas the Sunni powers on the other hand, led by Saudi Arabia, the UAE and all the other Sunni states in the Gulf region, they would closely align with US and Israel and form a secret partnership. From 1970s itself, we saw this split in the Arab world where the Muslim countries, they got divided over their support to the Palestinian movement. While the Shia countries continued their overt and covert backing to the Palestinian movement, including support to Palestinian terrorism. On the other hand, the Sunni countries, even though they continued their official policy of not having ties with Israel, right? For example, even today, Saudi Arabia still does not have ties with Israel. Until recently, UAE did not have ties with Israel, right? But from 1970s itself, they scaled down their support to the Palestinian movement and they aligned with US and Israel secretly, and they started working together as Iran became their common enemy. Now, this divide in the Arab world made things easier for India. Now that the Sunni powers themselves were reaching out to Israel and working secretly with Israel, it was much more easier for India to strike a balance in the relationship. So while we continued supporting the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian cause, we continued our new approach towards Israel. For example, in December 1991, just after India had set up ties with Israel, there was a vote which came up at the UN which equated Zionism, which is the nationalist ideology of Israel, with racism and racial discrimination. And interestingly, India voted against it. We were part of the majority countries which voted against this in direct support of Israel. So you see that after 1990s, our position has indeed changed. It has become more nuanced. It's not that we have shifted our position entirely. It's just that India has refined its policy. Previously, we never got the opportunity to balance out both the sides because we were under the leverage of the Arab countries, under the influence of the Arab countries, mainly because of our dependency on oil supplies. Now that India could act more independently, we got that flexibility because of the divide in the Arab world and the end of the Cold War, and India started balancing out its position. Parallelly, Israel had become critical for India in terms of security and military partnership. At the same time, our support for Palestinians had to continue on the grounds of human rights, right? So we have supported the right of Palestinians to have their own country. We still back the two-state solution while protecting Israel from certain resolutions which are overly critical of Israel. Or if any resolution is calling for international tribunals and investigations against Israel for war crimes, on such resolutions, we either abstain from that or we vote against it. All right. So in a way, on certain critical matters, we favor Israel either by voting in favor of Israel or abstaining from such votes. But when it comes to Palestinian rights, we have consistently backed the two-state solution and the Palestinian rights. Now, for example, there was another resolution which came up in the 1990s, which would condemn Israeli bombardment and the blockade of Gaza. By early 2000, Israel had completely blockaded Gaza, turning it into an open-air prison, resulting in large-scale human rights violations. And for every terror incident, Israel would retaliate with massive force, conducting airstrikes and large-scale ground operations, where hundreds of Palestinians could get killed. So India opposed such disproportionate use of force. When resolutions came up condemning Israel for using disproportionate force against Palestinian civilians, India would take a stand against Israel as well without hesitation. But at the same time, we had supported Israel when a resolution came up equating Zionism with racism and racial discrimination. So that is the kind of balance we have struck, and that is the nuanced position that you see over the decades. We have tempered our votes over other anti-Israeli resolutions, especially at other platforms like UN Human Rights Council, UNESCO, and others. If a resolution is heavily critical of Israel, if a resolution is targeting Israel with investigations, international tribunals over war crimes and human rights violations, on such resolutions we abstain or we vote in favor of Israel. But when it comes to Palestinian rights, Israel's use of disproportionate force against Palestinians in the occupied territories, in such cases we support the Palestinian stand. We take the side of the Palestinian side and we vote accordingly. So that is the balance that you find, and it has become more refined after 2014. Under the Modi government, you see a more refinement of this approach. For example, you see a clear shift in certain aspects, especially when resolutions that are heavily critical of Israel are brought up at the UN or any global body. In the recent past itself, there have been such resolutions, right? Previously, we would have voted for such resolutions, meaning we would have voted against Israel previously, maybe in the 1980s or 1990s. But now our position has changed to either abstain from them or even to vote against them. Especially if the resolution is calling for international inquiries or investigations into Israel's alleged war crimes. At the same time, we continue the stand on Palestine, as I told you. Recently, Israel had carried out large-scale bombardment of Gaza Strip, right? We criticized Israel. We voted in favor of Palestinian rights. In fact, the Modi government has even increased the annual contribution that India makes for the UN Relief Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees. PM Modi visited Ramallah, which is the administrative capital of Palestine, where the Palestinian Authority is seated. Along with visiting Israel, PM Modi has visited Ramallah as well. We've increased our annual contribution from $1 million to $5 million, further extending our support to the Palestinian cause and the rights of the Palestinians. So that is the balanced position that you see, which has been quite consistent in India's approach. Recently, the United States under President Donald Trump brought out a controversial resolution at the UN urging the world to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and US even shifted its embassy to Jerusalem. Now this was unacceptable to India. Most countries rejected the resolution. India also voted against it. So we didn't hesitate to vote against Israel. India has done that in the past as well, right? Because Jerusalem, as envisioned, is supposed to be a part of Palestine, with part of it being under Israeli control. But Israel's increasing illegal Jewish settlements and the complete occupation of Jerusalem has always been rejected by India, and when Donald Trump pushed the resolution to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel instead of Tel Aviv, and US even shifted its embassy to Jerusalem, India rejected this and voted against Israel, and we voted against the resolution. At the same time, at UNHRC and at the International Criminal Court, resolutions were brought up criticizing Israel and accusing Israel of war crimes. In such resolutions, we have abstained, and we have even voted against one of them. Exactly in 2016, India voted against a UNHRC resolution calling for ICC investigation into the war crimes allegedly committed by Israel. We even abstained from one such resolution in 2015 where Israel was criticized more than Hamas. Hamas being a terror organization, this was not acceptable for India, so we abstained from such a vote. So thus favoring Israel as well. Then at the Economic Social Council, the ECOSOC, the UN Economic and Social Council, which was one of the principal organs of the UN, in 2019, a resolution was brought up to give observer status to an NGO that is linked with Hamas. India rejected this. We voted in favor of Israel and ensured this resolution was defeated. Because a so-called NGO linked with Hamas was being given observer status at the Economic and Social Council. So this explains India's approach in a way, right? That is why the opposition parties are alleging that the government has shifted the position. But if you look at it, it's not. It's more of a refinement in our approach over the decades. Now, if you look at what India has done in the last few years, it's largely based on the current geopolitics of the world, our own national interests, and as well as the developments happening between Israel and Palestine. Right? We can't have a unilateral or just a uniform approach all the time. Depending on each situation, India has fine-tuned the approach, but our balanced support for Israel and Palestine has always remained, and it remains even today. In 2018, for example, it's very interesting to note this particular comparison. In 2018, there was a resolution at UNGA which deplored the use of excessive disproportionate force by Israel against Palestinian civilians in the occupied territories, including the Gaza Strip. We supported the resolution because Israeli disproportionate force had killed 220 civilians. Is that clear? So we voted against Israel. India did not hesitate. Even the current government voted against Israel, favoring the use of limited force. So Israel was being pointed out here for using disproportionate force against civilians, which is against humanitarian law. But now, with 9,000 Palestinians dead in the last 3 weeks, including 3,000 children, right? India's abstention is quite interesting. So what explains India's decision to abstain from the vote? Right? This is where the opposition parties are criticizing the government, saying that the government has shifted India's approach towards Israel and Palestine. But the answer is not so simple, right? There is a gray area that exists here. Now, the government of India has said it has justified the recent vote, the recent abstaining that we did, by pointing out that the Jordanian resolution which was pushed, it did not explicitly call out Hamas for the terror attack. This is the reason why India abstained. Alright, even though 120 countries backed the resolution calling for a ceasefire and end of the Israeli war against Hamas, India did not support this because it did not contain explicit references to terrorism and the terror attack carried out by Hamas. Now, this is something that India firmly believes in. India being one of the biggest victims of terrorism, that to state-sponsored terrorism from Pakistan. We are not in the business of distinguishing between good and bad terrorism, unlike few countries which do that. So India has always taken a same stand against terrorism. India wanted a direct reference to Hamas to be made and the attack on 7th October to be labeled as a terrorist attack. Since the Jordanian resolution did not contain such explicit references, that is the reason why India has abstained. Is that clear? India even supported an amendment that was pushed by Canada. Canada tried to push an amendment to this Jordanian resolution which would have added very specific references to Hamas and terrorism. And India supported this amendment. But eventually the amendment was defeated because majority countries voted in favor of Jordanian resolution. It's also interesting to note that India itself has not made any direct reference to Hamas and calling out Hamas as a terrorist group. After the terror attack, even though PM Modi spoke to Netanyahu and all the world leaders, we even issued public statements on the developments, right? We did call out the incident as a terror attack, but we did not explicitly reference Hamas and equate that with a terror group. Officially, India is yet to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. If we were to do it, it has to be done under the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, under which the Home Ministry needs to proscribe Hamas as a terrorist outfit. India itself has not done that. But Through the UN vote, we were expecting the attack on 7th October to be labeled as a terror attack carried out by Hamas. Since the explicit reference was missing, India has said we can't support such resolutions, which is taking a weak stand against terrorism. It's on these lines that India has abstained, according to the government of India. Now, that is the reason why the opposition parties are raising the allegation that India has shifted its position. But however, a careful examination and a thorough review of the previous decisions will show that this is just a refinement of our approach. It's not that the government's policy has shifted overnight. It's more of striking a balance. Now, if you look at Israeli reaction to India's decision, you will get to know that we have not completely favored Israel as well. Israel has welcomed the support. However, it has said it would have liked India to vote against the resolution, just like the US and UK did. So Israel also is not completely happy with the Indian abstention, which means India's decision to abstain is yet another example of striking a middle ground, taking a balanced approach on the issue. As a resolution did not call out the attack as a terror attack by Hamas, that is what kept India away from voting for the resolution. At the same time, Israel being a key ally, right? We have defended Israel's right to act in self-defense and to act against terrorism, right? So by abstaining from a resolution like this, in a way we are striking a balance to maintain our ties with Israel while continuing our principled approach on the Palestinian issue. Is that clear? It's very interesting to note how the world has been divided as well. Now, if you look at the support for Israel right now, it's largely the Western countries which are completely backing Israel. They were the ones who primarily voted against the resolution. So US, UK and few other European countries, they are firmly backing Israel. Whereas the global South countries have largely voted for the resolution. They voted against Israel. For example, you take India's neighbors, including Bhutan, Bangladesh, right? They've all voted against Israel and calling for the end of the conflict. Then even if you look at groupings like BRICS and several global South countries from Africa, Asia and Latin America, they've all criticized the disproportionate use of force by Israel and they have urged a humanitarian truce, calling for a ceasefire, and they all backed the resolution against Israel, right? So in a way, India is in between, right? India sees itself as a champion of the global South, as a leader of the global South countries, right? We provide leadership to the developing, underdeveloped countries. At the same time, our ties with Western countries has grown. So by abstaining, we are striking a balance between the West and the global South as well, while continuing our close ties with Israel, while protecting Israel from any unnecessary interventions, at the same time continuing our ideological support to Palestine and our support for humanitarian cause. Right? Now, India has not favored Israel completely. By abstaining, we have taken that middle ground, sending a message to Israel as well that disproportionate force will not be acceptable to India. In the recent years itself, India has criticized Israel for using disproportionate force against civilians. So abstaining from this vote is another example of India striking a balance. It's a tightrope balance that India has to strike between conflicting sides. And this is also very consistent with the other votes we have casted at the United Nations with regard to other countries. In the recent years, there have been many other conflicts that have come up at the UN, right? Be it Russia's war against Ukraine, be it resolutions targeting the Syrian government with regard to Syria's civil war, or be it the UN resolutions against Myanmar's military junta for the Rohingya genocide and the current civil war which has broken out. Right? In all these resolutions, India has consistently abstained from all the votes. Right? If resolutions are critical of countries like Russia, Syria or Myanmar, we have abstained from the votes. This is a continuation of India's realistic foreign policy. The goal is to balance our interests, balance our ties in a polarized world. We do live in a polarized, divided world today. So India strikes this balance quite well, and abstaining from such votes is one way of doing it. So that's why I told you, abstaining doesn't mean we are indecisive, doesn't mean we are not taking a decision. This itself is a decision, this itself is a policy approach of India. For example, by abstaining from the votes targeting Russia, right, we have sent a message to Russia that we are there to stand with you. We don't support the Western sanctions, the Western criticism against Russia. At the same time, we are sending a message to Russia that you need to end the war. You can't continue such illegal wars against Ukraine. The same message goes out for Myanmar, right? India sends out a message to Myanmar that by abstaining from the vote, we are supporting the government in Myanmar. We are ready to work with the military junta. We have always maintained very cordial ties with Myanmar's military junta. We are ready to give them military support, economic support. At the same time, we are sending a message that if you don't protect human rights, if you don't stabilize your country, we might vote against you. The same option has been exercised here as well. By abstaining from the vote, we are striking the balance between our commitment to Israel and Palestine. It also sends a firm message against terrorism. Even though India itself has not designated Hamas as a terror group yet, it sends out a message that we stand against terrorism of all forms, as India itself is a big victim of terrorism. At the same time, we are sending a message to Israel to not continue using disproportionate force against civilians. And we are sending out a message to Palestinians as well that we support the two-state solution. We support their basic rights. And it also helps maintain our cordial ties with Israel, the close strategic relations that have developed with Israel. So this is what explains India's position. And unlike what the opposition says or what the media says, right, India's policy has not really shifted. It's more of a refinement. It's more of a betterment in India's approach, which has consistently happened over the decades. With changing geopolitics, with changing interests of India, and also the developments that are happening at that point in time. Accordingly, our position has shifted, which, if you look at it collectively, strikes a very good balance between the conflicting interests that we are faced with in the region, in the West Asia region. Is that clear? So this is what I wanted to discuss under this important article. Now let's move on and look at the next article from page number 1 that refers to the recent earthquake in Nepal. Nepal was hit by a devastating earthquake of 6.4 magnitude and more than 150 people have lost their lives. This is the strongest earthquake to have hit Nepal since 2015. Back in 2015, Nepal was hit by a 7+ magnitude earthquake that had killed thousands of people and had caused large-scale destruction and damage. So during the 2015 earthquake, India had given a lot of assistance to Nepal under Operation Mantri. India had launched Operation Mantri to provide HADR support. HADR stands for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief. As India has become a global leader in disaster management, and we have very professional disaster management forces like NDRF, right? We provide disaster management as a service. It's a part of our soft power diplomacy to project our soft power influence. We help out many countries, especially small, poor countries, developing countries, when they face disasters by providing HADR assistance. So India's NDRF, the Indian Army, Indian Air Force were deployed in Nepal back in 2015 under Operation Mantri to provide disaster management assistance to Nepal. Even now, Prime Minister Modi has expressed grief at the losses that Nepal has suffered, because just few weeks back there was another major earthquake which was also 6 magnitude and above. So Nepal has been hit by 2 back-to-back major earthquakes. So India has expressed complete support. We are looking to send assistance again. And it's in this context that you should understand the vulnerability of Nepal and as well as India to such devastating earthquakes. What makes the Himalayan region prone to high intensity earthquakes, high magnitude earthquakes? This could be a very important topic in geography and as well as in disaster management, both for your prelims and mains. The answer to this question is very simple. It's not just Nepal, in fact the whole Himalayan belt stretching all the way from Afghanistan, Pakistan, covering India, Nepal, Bhutan, Northeast India and touching till Myanmar. This whole stretch that you can see here as well is highly vulnerable for seismic activity. This is a direct result of plate tectonics. It's a result of the tectonic movement which is happening below the Earth's crust. As you know, The interior of the earth is made up of these massive tectonic plates on which the continental landmass sits. So here we have the Indian plate. This is the Indian plate here, consisting primarily of the Indian subcontinent, western, northern and eastern parts of India, which has been constantly diving under the Eurasian plate. This is an active subduction zone. The Indian plate is constantly subducting, meaning it is diving under the Eurasian plate, lifting up material, and which results in the formation of your Himalayan mountains. The Himalayas are considered as young fold mountains. It's the youngest mountain range in the world, which is constantly forming even as we speak. Right? The Himalayas continue to grow as we speak every year. That's because the Indian plate is in constant motion, diving under the Eurasian plate, creating an active subduction zone. So at this plate boundary where the two tectonic plates are interacting, there is a tremendous amount of elastic energy that gets built up. And whenever there is a rupture or a sudden movement of these plates, it releases tremendous amounts of energy along these geological fault lines, causing that energy to travel through the Earth's crust, which we call as an earthquake. The seismic waves which are released travels through the interior of the Earth, strikes the crust, the surface, causing the trembling of the surface, which essentially is an earthquake. So from Afghanistan all the way till northeast India, this whole belt, the Himalayan belt, is extremely vulnerable because it is an active subduction zone. That is the reason why the Himalayan region is a highly seismic region. It's highly prone to earthquakes. To be specific, Western Nepal is very vulnerable, where the western part of Nepal meets with India's Uttarakhand and the Tibetan plateau of China. At that point, Nepal is very, very vulnerable. Experts predict even an 8 or 9 magnitude earthquake to hit the region. Then even Jammu and Kashmir, all the way till Gilgit-Baltistan, then the Pakistani side of occupied Kashmir, going till Afghanistan, is another highly vulnerable belt. Then towards Sikkim and northeast India, we have another extremely vulnerable fault line. Even here, experts predict a possible 8 or 9 magnitude earthquake, which can wipe out cities entirely, flatten cities entirely. Now, that is the reason why India also has to be very cautious. We need to be prepared as part of our disaster management planning. Even though India has made rapid advances in the field of disaster management, when it comes to earthquakes, we lack preparedness. Just look at the hazard vulnerability map of India. This seismic map is showing you the hazard vulnerability profile of India. Is that clear? The IMD, India Meteorological Department, which is the nodal agency to measure earthquakes, has worked with NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, to develop the hazard vulnerability map of India. Accordingly, India has been divided into these 4 seismic zones, from zone 2 to zone 5. You can see the whole Himalayan belt falling under zone 4 and zone 5. Right? Northeast India is very vulnerable and comes under zone 5. Parts of the Terai region here, this is the Terai belt where the plains of Nepal extend towards UP and Bihar. Then look at the western part of Nepal where it touches with Uttarakhand. And parts of Himachal and Jammu and Kashmir extending towards POK, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. This whole region falls under zone 5. The whole region is seismically very, very delicate and sensitive. Apart from this, we have Andaman Nicobar Islands as well under zone 5 due to its proximity to the Pacific Ring of Fire. Near Indonesia, the Pacific Ring of Fire passes through, which is very close to our Andaman Nicobar Islands. Right? The Pacific Ring of Fire is one of the most active seismic zones in the world. It's like a circle from Indonesia all the way till Japan, Philippines, the Pacific. Right? This whole circle is the most active zone for earthquakes, volcanoes and landslides because multiple tectonic plate boundaries exist over here. So that it's because of that Andaman Nicobar Islands becomes very vulnerable and falls under zone 5. Then the Bhuj region in Gujarat, in the Kutch region here, it's very, very vulnerable. It falls under zone 5 and 4. This is where the Arabian plate is crashing into the Indian plate. So at this plate boundary, where the Indian and Arabian plates are interacting, you have another major fault line. We have seen a devastating earthquake here. In 2000, there was a massive earthquake in Bhuj where thousands of people were killed. It was one of the biggest disasters for India. Now around zone 5, you can see zone 4 being present. Now this is the real concern for India. In zone 4, you can see in the Indo-Gangetic Plain region, there are many populated cities, including our capital, Delhi, in UP, in Bihar, in Northeast India, right, in Uttarakhand, and across the Himalayan belt. There are densely populated towns and cities. And the worst part is that India is not prepared. See, the best way to secure against earthquakes is to ensure that the buildings, your infrastructure, especially your critical infrastructure, your cities and towns, they should all be made earthquake resilient. Today it is possible to design buildings which are resistant to earthquakes, which can withstand the impact of earthquakes. With better architectural design, better engineering and better construction, you can ensure that you can build resilience against earthquakes. Right? Buildings collapsing is when earthquake becomes a disaster. That's when the hazard turns into a disaster. Now imagine an earthquake if it were to happen in an uninhabited region. It's unlikely to be a disaster. But the buildings which collapse due to the trembling of the surface of the earth, which hits the foundation of the building, that is where the hazard turns into a disaster, killing hundreds and thousands of people. So one of the best ways to mitigate the disaster risk is to prepare and plan. This is part of the disaster management cycle that which we have adopted. This is what the global framework suggests as well. Even the Sendai framework of the UN suggests the same approach, which India has adopted into its national disaster management policy and plan. So as part of planning and preparedness, we need to try and mitigate the impact of earthquakes. We need to reduce the disaster risk. We may not be able to prevent earthquakes, it's beyond human control, but definitely we can mitigate the risk associated with it to reduce the losses, the loss of human life, the damage to the economy, etc. But for this, you have to strictly enforce your building codes, your building standards. You have to strictly enforce the land use planning standards or zoning standards. Now this is where India is struggling. Even though the building codes exist, land use planning is done and zoning standards have been established. The problem is with enforcement, especially from our local bodies, the panchayats, the municipal bodies, right, the city corporations, the state governments, which have a bigger role in enforcing the building standards, the codes and the zoning standards. They have failed in enforcement. The nexus between local authorities and the real estate mafia and the construction industry has led to large-scale violation of building standards and land use planning standards, which means densely populated cities have come up in highly seismic zones, including our national capital. And majority of the buildings and our critical infrastructure, they're not earthquake resilient. Right? So this is where India faces the biggest risk, just like Nepal. So that is something you need to understand from this important development. Now coming to the next article, on page number 14, under the economy section, we have an article which highlights the statements of India's chief economic advisor. The chief economic advisor, V. Ananta Nageshwaran, has made a very important observation. Now you know that around the world, countries are planning to shift towards greener technologies. In order to reduce their emissions, to tackle climate change, the world is shifting towards greener and cleaner technologies. It could be electric vehicles, it could be green hydrogen, right? Or it could be solar, wind and other renewable forms of energy. Now this transition from fossil fuel based economy to cleaner, greener technologies, this transition which we call the green transition, requires a lot of investments and it requires a lot of critical resources along with technology. Now, this is something that is not readily available for developing countries and poor countries. Correct? To invest in solar energy, to invest in a transition towards electric vehicles, or to build up your battery technology, right? To focus on green hydrogen. You need advanced technology, scientific expertise, along with tremendous investments and critical resources. There are several important minerals that are crucial to drive this transition. For example, you have lithium, right? Lithium is absolutely critical for lithium-ion batteries or lithium-based batteries, which is the foundation of your EV industry, the electric vehicle industry. Countries will have to depend on several critical minerals and rare earth minerals, which are available only with few countries. Very few countries have such critical resources. Now, this is where a challenge comes up for several developing nations and poor countries, including a developing nation like India. And this is the concern the Chief Economic Advisor is flagging in this important article. The Chief Economic Advisor is saying that oligopolies have control over rare earths. He has said oligopolies have control over rare earths and critical mineral resources, and this is the key hurdle, the major roadblock in green transition of developing economies. He has also said that since developed countries largely have the technology and the funds available, and few countries have access to critical rare minerals, they could weaponize this, meaning they could use this as an economic leverage to gain geopolitical advantages. That is the concern being flagged by the Chief Economic Advisor. So the Chief Economic Advisor has used a term called oligopoly. Now, what do you mean by that? What is oligopoly? You would have heard of monopoly, duopoly. It is similar to that. In a monopoly, there is one player, one major supplier who is dominating the market, right? In a duopoly, there are two entities, two countries or two companies which are dominating the market, which have complete control over the supply of a key product. A oligopoly is similar to monopoly or duopoly. There are a small number of suppliers, a few suppliers, maybe 4 to 5 or 6 to 8 suppliers. They largely control the market. So when a small group of suppliers are controlling the market, it could be few companies within our country, or it could be few nations at the global level. When few suppliers are controlling the market, it is called a oligopoly. So these players who have a dominating control over the market, over the supply of a key product, they can manipulate the market. They can restrict output to manipulate the prices. They can fix the prices in order to increase their profits. Correct? To drive their profits up, they can fix the prices by artificially managing the supply-demand equation. Irrespective of the demand, they can alter the supply to suit their interests, which is to make profits. Now, this gives enormous economic leverage to countries, especially with regard to critical minerals, rare earth minerals, etc. As they are crucial for making the green transition, right? Some of them can economically leverage this. Those who have these supplies, these resources, they can use this as a leverage to punish the smaller countries. They can weaponize it, use it for geopolitical reasons as well. So that is the concern flagged by the Chief Economic Advisor. Now let me show you some important maps just to give you an idea as to which few countries have an oligopoly over some key resources. Now this map is showing you the distribution of some critical minerals which are critical in various industries, from palladium to antimony to phosphorus, magnesium, beryllium and helium, iridium, platinum, etc. It is available only with few countries in large quantities. So Russia with regard to palladium supplies, China with regard to all these critical minerals, even South Africa and few other African nations, Brazil, US. So they have a greater control over some critical minerals that are needed for the green energy transition. If you look at lithium supplies, which is another critical mineral needed for battery technology and for electric vehicles, right? Lithium reserves are concentrated in the hands of just few countries. You have your lithium triangle here in South America, comprising of Argentina, Chile and Bolivia. Right? These three countries have one of the world's largest reserves of lithium. Some African countries, China, Australia, right, even US to an extent, they hold the largest reserves, and China especially controls most of the lithium market. The overall lithium production and supply market, the whole supply chain, is largely dominated by China. Now this is what worries India. Even if you look at rare earth elements, there are 17 rare earth elements in total on the periodic table, right? They find very important applications in various industries, from aerospace to defense to electronics and communication technology. Across these industries, rare earth elements are critical, and China already has a dominating control of the rare earth supply market. Is that clear? So even though India has some of its own resources, it is not enough to meet the demand. It's not enough to meet our own domestic demand, forget meeting the global demand. So some of these countries, like few South American countries, China in particular, and other global powers including the United States, they could easily form an oligopoly, meaning they could control the supply of critical minerals, critical resources, rare earth elements, which could become a very big challenge for countries like India. And especially if we have hostile relations with some of the suppliers like China, right? Given that we have an active border dispute, we have even fought a war over the border dispute, and we have constant tensions going on in the relationship. Countries like China might use the economic leverage. They might misuse the dependency we have on their supplies, on their supply chains, and they could potentially weaponize this for geopolitical advantages. Right? This could increase the cost as well for India as far as our green transition is concerned, because we need to develop the technology as well. Some countries may not be ready to sell the technology to India. Procuring the resources could become a challenge for India. We may have to spend more, right? The developed countries may not provide adequate finance and technology, which they are supposed to share under the Climate Change Convention. So that is the concern the Chief Economic Advisor is flagging for the Indian economy in the coming decades, and what could create roadblocks for our green energy transition. So this is another important topic for your mains. Now this completes my detailed discussion of today's newspaper. Now let's take a quick look at the small prelims related articles. On page number 1, we have an article that makes a reference to the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Prime Minister Modi has announced that this important food security scheme is going to be extended for 5 more years. Is that clear? It was supposed to expire in December 2023. By the end of the year, this important food security scheme was going to expire. But now the PM has announced that it is being extended for 5 more years. So what is this scheme all about? When was it launched? What is its purpose? That is something you should understand. The Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana was a flagship scheme launched by the Modi government during the pandemic. When the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, the biggest concern was about food security for the poor people, especially for poor migrant workers who lost their jobs due to the lockdown, and several migrant workers started moving back to their hometowns. We started witnessing a reverse migration from India's urban areas back to the rural areas. So to ensure that the nutritional status and the food security of the poor migrant workers is not affected, this important scheme was launched by the Modi government, the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. This was in addition to the subsidized grains, food grains that the poor people were already getting through the public distribution system as per the National Food Security Act of 2013. The previous Manmohan Singh government had enacted a landmark legislation where right to food was declared as a legal right. Through the National Food Security Act, 5 kgs of subsidized food grains were already being provided through the ration stores, through the ration card system via the PDS delivery system, the public distribution system. So in addition to this subsidized food grains that the poor people were already getting, an additional 5 kg food grains were provided for free through the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Is that clear? To deal with the impact of the pandemic and to ensure it does not affect food security and nutrition, an additional 5 kg of food grains was provided free of cost. So around 80 crore beneficiaries have benefited from this important scheme, which is being implemented through the Finance Ministry. To enable wider access to the scheme, to make it more inclusive, one nation, one ration card plan was also implemented, so that ration card issued in one state could be used by migrant workers in another state to avail the benefits of this important food security scheme. Right? Now the ration card has become portable. Doesn't matter which state you are in, it will really help migrant workers who have come from another state to procure food grains under the existing PDS system at a subsidized rate, along with 5 additional kgs of free food grains under the Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. So this important scheme is being extended for 5 more years as announced by the Prime Minister. Is that clear? But opposition parties have criticized it, saying that this is again a clear electoral tactic, because the announcement has come right before the elections in Chhattisgarh. In fact, the announcement was made by the PM in Chhattisgarh during a political campaign. And also national elections are slated in a few months next year. Right? So before the model code of conduct kicks in, the opposition parties are alleging that government is launching such populist schemes just to please the voters. But however, you can't deny the fact that such important food security schemes, they do serve a big purpose in terms of socio-economic welfare. Next, on the second page, we have an article referring to the dangerous levels of air pollution in Delhi NCR region. Now, this is a common feature during every winter season. Every year, we have multiple articles from November to January highlighting the hazardous conditions in Delhi NCR region and in northern parts of India. Right? The air quality index has deteriorated to severe, very severe plus category. The air is so harmful that if you were to spend a few hours in the open inhaling this toxic air, it's as good as smoking around 15 to 20 cigarettes a day. That is the amount of particulate matter that enters your respiratory system. Right? This is an emergency situation. So in this context, there are actually 3-4 articles in today's newspaper, and they make a mention of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. In the previous session, we understood about Graded Response Action Plan. If you remember, we had discussed the Graded Response Action Plan. Yesterday, we spoke about this. So today, I'm picking one more topic from here, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. What is it and how is it different from your National Air Quality Index? That is something you should understand. See, through the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, around 12 major air pollutants have been identified by the Central Pollution Control Board. And these pollutants, they have to be within a prescribed limit. These limits are prescribed through this initiative. Is that clear? The Central Pollution Control Board, which is responsible for tackling air and water pollution under the Air Act and the Water Act, has drawn its powers from the Air Prevention Control of Pollution Act 1981, and it has notified these standards for air pollution. Is that clear? It was brought out in 1990s itself. It has been revised and updated multiple times. And the current standards, they are part of the National Air Quality Monitoring Program. It is monitored, these pollutant levels are monitored under the National Air Quality Monitoring Program. So please remember the 12 pollutants. PM10 and PM2.5, which are very fine particulate matter that can easily enter your lungs, your bloodstream as well. Nitrogen dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide. Be very careful here. many students get confused with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is not an air pollutant. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas responsible for global warming, whereas carbon monoxide is an air pollutant. Then ozone. Even here, be careful. Stratospheric ozone present in the stratosphere is beneficial for us as it blocks out the harmful UV radiation. But ground level ozone, which forms due to air pollution, is extremely toxic and dangerous. Then ammonia, lead, and then you have benzene, benzopyrene, arsenic and nickel. These are the 12 pollutants for which standard limits have been set through the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. You can see the limits over here. You don't have to remember this, but just know that such limits have been set. These are the standards that have been set, and these pollutants are monitored under the National Air Quality Monitoring Program. Now, how is this different from your air quality index? The National Air Quality Index is mainly for the common man. This is to convey the alert in a simple and easily understandable manner for the common public. Because see, the standards which you just saw, they are very technical in nature. A common man can't understand those limits, those standards. So to simplify the communication from the government, from the Pollution Control Board to the public, the Air Quality Index was launched in 2014. This is a color-coded index, right? Different categories of air pollution have been identified, and a one number, one color, one description system has been developed. So just by looking at the alert level, the category of air pollution, people can easily understand what is the risk and what measures they need to take to protect against such serious air pollution. So under the Air Quality Index, only 8 of these pollutants are considered out of the 12 recognized under the Ambient Air Quality Standards. Alright, there were 12 air pollutants that we saw which are monitored under the Ambient Air Quality Standards. Out of that, only 8 are taken into account. The first 8. The Air Quality Index does not include benzene, benzopyrene, arsenic and nickel. Kindly remember this point, very important for your prelims. So the other 8, PM10 and 2.5, NO2, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, ammonia and lead. These 8 air pollutants are monitored under the Air Quality Index. Understood? Now next article, on page number 9, we have a reference to a very important aircraft, the IL-38. The IL-38, the Ilyushin 38, is a Soviet origin aircraft that India had procured primarily for maritime surveillance and anti-submarine warfare. It can also be used as a transport aircraft if required, right? It was procured primarily for the Indian Navy, even Indian Air Force has a few. So it is mainly for maritime surveillance, to conduct surveillance in the maritime theater and to conduct anti-submarine warfare, to track submarines, enemy submarines, and even to launch counter-attacks against enemy submarines. So this old Soviet era aircraft is being decommissioned by the Indian Navy. The IL-38s, they are very old, they are of Soviet origin, they have served a great purpose for India since 1970s, 80s. Now we are decommissioning them and retiring them. Now India is switching to more modern aircrafts, including the P-8I Poseidon, then as well as the Seahawk helicopters, and we are also looking at the Sea Guardian drones, right? All of these are being procured from the United States. The P-8 Poseidon, which is one of the most formidable aircrafts in the world today, right? Built by Boeing. It is one of the leading aircrafts in terms of maritime surveillance and anti-submarine warfare capabilities. Even the Romeo Seahawk helicopters that we are procuring from the US, they also come with anti-submarine warfare capabilities. The Sea Guardian drones, the MQ-9B drones that we are looking to procure, right? Even they are known for maritime surveillance, including anti-submarine warfare capabilities. So this is clearly by keeping an eye on China's navy which has been increasing its presence across the Indo-Pacific. So we are retiring the old Soviet aircrafts and replacing them with the more modern fleets that are available by procuring them from the United States. Next, on the same page, there is an important article that makes a mention of the Butler Palace in Lucknow. I feel it's an important topic for history, for art and culture. You can see the Butler Palace over here. It is a representation of Rajasthani and Indo-Mughal style of architecture. Please note down this point. This palace, which is in Lucknow, was built as the official residence of the Commissioner of Awadh, Harcourt Butler, in 1915. That's why it's called the Butler Palace. It was built as the residence, the official residence for the Commissioner of the Awadh province, that was Harcourt Butler, the British Commissioner, the British representative in Awadh. This is owned by the royal family of Mohammedabad. The royal family of Mohammedabad traces back its roots to 13th century. Alright, in the 13th century, these royals, they settled in Awadh, currently around Lucknow, and they owed their allegiance to the Mughals. And during independence in 1947, the then Awadh king, Muhammad Amir Ahmad Khan, migrated to Pakistan. During partition, the Awadh king opted to move to Pakistan, whereas his family, his son, they remained back in India. So after the 1965 war, all the Pakistani properties, that is properties in India owned by people who had migrated to Pakistan, they were declared as enemy property under the Enemy Property Act of 1968. So Butler Palace fell amongst them, as it belonged to the royal family of Mohammedabad, to King Muhammad Amir Ahmad Khan, and since he had migrated to Pakistan, even though his family was left behind, right, the property was declared as enemy property after the 1965 conflict. But now, the State Archaeological Department and other concerned authorities are trying to revive the palace and turn it into a tourist haven. Is that clear? It's a representation of Rajasthani Indo-Mughal architecture. So that is what you should remember about this important location. Next, on page number 11, we have an important article that makes a reference to the H. pylori bacteria. It stands for Heliobacter pylori. Helio or Helicobacter pylori. It's a spiral shaped flagellated bacterium which is quite commonly found in the gastrointestinal system. Right? Most of us will have this bacteria in our stomach, in the gastrointestinal system. For most of them it is harmless, but it is largely responsible for all the gastroenteritis and the gastro related disorders, starting with ulcers to gastritis to stomach cancer as well. Understood? So Heliobacter pylori is primarily responsible for various gastrointestinal disorders, from ulcers to gastritis to even stomach cancer. Now these bacteria, they have evolved and they have become drug resistant due to abuse of antibiotics, right? Due to the abuse of these specific antibiotics, the bacterium has gained drug resistance, and that is what is being referred to in this article. Institute, the National Institute for Cholera, which deals with gastrointestinal disorders, it has come out with a more effective way of detecting drug resistant Helicobacter pylori. Right? This improves the diagnosis and treatment of drug resistant H. pylori gastrointestinal diseases. So that is what is being referred to in the article. The technical details are not needed. You should just know what is Helicobacter pylori. You should know it's a bacterium. It resides in the stomach, in the gut lining, and it is responsible for all the gastrointestinal disorders. So that is what you should be aware of. Coming to the last article in the News in Frame section of the online edition of the Hindu, on page number 1, there is a reference to a traditional art and craft form from Tamil Nadu. I feel it's a very important topic for your prelims. It's referring to a type of carpet which is woven in Tamil Nadu. It's called the Korai paai carpet, or the mats. You can see them here, the colorful mats that are displayed here in this image. They are made from a type of grass. It is specifically grown in the Kaveri river delta in the Karur district of Tamil Nadu. Is that clear? In the Kaveri River Delta, in the Karur district, a specific type of grass, the Korai grass, scientifically known as Cyperus pangori. This is cultivated here. It's a very strong and tall grass. So this is harvested by the farmers, and by using traditional methods, they weave this into a carpet or a mat. This is very popular all across South India. If you ever visit even Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, even Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, most of the homes will have this type of mat. It's made from a grass. It's primarily produced in the Karur district through traditional methods. So it's an example of traditional craft, and this carpet is very popular. It's even given as a gift during weddings and ceremonies. It is known to remain very cool during summer and provides warmth during winter. And it's very sustainable. It does not use any kind of plastic or any hazardous material. It's entirely made up of sustainable natural material. The grass is dried by the farmers after harvesting, right? Then they dye it with different colors, very bright colors are used, and then they weave it with different patterns to make these beautiful carpets and mats. All right, so please pay attention to this. There might be a prelims question from here. So this completes my detailed discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper. I hope you guys have liked it. Please take up these two questions for your answer writing practice. Do let me know how the session went in the comments. Do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Have a good day.